Today I'm going to show you 5 reasons why your bar chords might suck, and also some tips on how to improve them. Number 1, the bendy bar. Playing a bar chord is like playing with a capo, but instead of using a capo, you use your finger. Now if you put a capo diagonally across the strings, you're going to get a lot of buzz in the high strings. And guess what? The same thing happens with your finger when you don't keep it straight up against the frets. It's really common to see students with this bendy bar finger. So when I put down my chord, my low strings are okay, but the high string, I get this ghost note. So as a tip, when you're setting up your bar, pretend it's like a capo, straight and firm and right up against the frets. Generally, we want to use the bony part of your finger, but a little bit more rounded is okay as well. Number 2, flat fingers. To get all the notes clean to bar chords, you need your fingers to be right up on your fingertips. And you can see here that I have a fairly sharp angle. This allows for the notes underneath to be played cleanly. For students getting into bars for the first time, this can be impossible as this joint hasn't developed the strength or the flexibility to be able to hold this angle. So they drop down like this. And then you get those muted notes underneath. Now if you have thinner fingers, you can tend to get away with having a little bit of bend in this joint. But if you have thicker fingers, you have a much smaller margin of error. These days there are some guitars that have been designed with wider necks, and a classical guitar, for example, is easier for people with big hands and thick fingers. But I don't think that you need to go rush out and buy a new guitar, because it's more important to develop that flexibility and strength in this joint. And from what I've seen, even people with thick fingers with persistence do get it. As a tip, to work on fixing your flat fingers, find a bar chord. For example, here is a D minor. I'm on the 5th fret with an A minor shape. And work on moving that joint of your fingers so you're trying to move up towards 90 degrees. It's going to take a while of practicing this for a few minutes every day to get that, but essentially you are stretching your fingers. And like trying to do the splits, you're not going to be able to do that overnight. It's going to take time. It might mean moving the strings up a little bit to get that little bit of extra space. And that's fine as well. Incidentally, many find practicing bar chords around the 5th fret more comfortable, as you don't need to stretch the fingers as wide as you do down on the 1st fret. But I'll cover more of that later. And once you develop enough flexibility to do a bar chord clean one time, with practice you can do it right every time.
60% of the time, it works. Every time.
At this point, it's important to point out that a lot of these issues that I'm showing today are actually related. I'm not a doctor in fingerology, but I found that a lack of strength or flexibility in this joint can lead to a bendy bar because you can't really get that straight, or worse, a really bent wrist to try and overcompensate for this lack of flexibility. That's why bar chords take you so long, because you're having to retrain your whole hand into doing something that it's not designed to do. So that's why patience is really the key to bar chords. Number 3, the carpal tunnel rest. There are no 3 words that strike fear into guitarists than carpal tunnel syndrome. It's a repetitive stress injury to the nerves of the wrist, and it can lead to permanent dysfunction of the hand in extreme situations, and for many, it can lead to long lingering pain. Now imagine you had a piece of rope and you kept rubbing it along the edge of a table. Eventually the rope will fray and break, and this is what happens to your nerves if you keep rubbing them along the wrist if it's kept in this extreme position, and it's very damaging for the nerves. I'm not a medical professional. If you're experiencing pain, you should stop and see a doctor. Back to normal talking speed. I touched on this before, but if you try and force your fingers onto their fingertips by coming underneath the neck, you can end up putting your wrist into this extreme position. Now, if you're also applying a lot of strength like you need to when you're holding down a bar chord, it's a recipe for disaster. So when you're practicing your bar chords, really try focusing on keeping your wrist as straight as possible. This is just a general health tip, but if you keep your wrist straight, you can hold this position all day long. But as soon as you start doing these extreme angles, you can kind of feel it if you do them, it starts to feel painful, and over a prolonged period of time, this does lead to repetitive stress issues. I found that practicing in front of a mirror is helpful, so you can check your form and make sure that your wrists aren't bent. Number 4, the bunch. Before the bunch, if you find this video helpful, please help me out by giving it a like. It takes a long time of playing guitar for your fingers to be able to unbunch and naturally separate without kind of forcing them to. This bunching presents a lot of challenges on guitar, just like playing open chords when you first start, like just trying to get that C across wide enough. But with bar chords, it can make it really difficult to keep your fingers close to the frets. You can see this on this F here, where I have quite a bit of space between my fingers and the frets into that gap there. And once again, I'm getting these ghost notes. Now you can help your finger placement by doing something as simple as just setting the chord shape first. I've got my fingers right next to the frets, and then afterwards putting the bar down. But I also find it useful to play simple songs with bar chord shapes that force you to move along the fretboard. For example, the start of Californication is only 2 chords, an A minor and an F. So what we're going to do is start by playing A minor and then work on unspreading my fingers when I play that F. And as I get more advanced, you can start building up your strumming as well. And by the way, if you need a bit of a refresher on how bar chords work and how to move shapes around the neck, I'll link a video in the description. Number 5, the death clamp. When you play bar chords, especially for a long time, it's inevitable that your hand is going to get sore, and that's due to the death clamp that's often applied. Some of this suffering is unavoidable because your hand is required to apply a lot of pressure. But it's not used to applying this, so it needs to build up the strength. However, I found that the hand is often applying unnecessary pressure, and it's done to compensate for the fingers not being in a great position to start with. For example, if there is a bendy bar and the fingers are far away from the frets, a death clamp is used to just try to pull everything together. But if the fingers were in a good position to start with, the clamp wouldn't need so much effort. Now, I'm not suggesting you try this at home because it's not very good for the guitar neck, but without using my thumb at all, my thumb's back here, I can play a bar chord cleanly. And that's because my bar is straight, my fingers are right up on the fingertips and also close to the frets. Now I'm using a bit of push and pull to hold this bar chord, and I'm getting the strength from my bicep as well as my forearm. So when I do put the thumb down, it's helping, but it's only like 40% to 50% of all the strength. Incidentally, I have my thumb at the top of the neck, and it's somewhere between the 5th and the 6th fret, so behind my index and middle fingers. And I find that's a good general area. Now, getting your bar chord transitions clean is a really important part of playing a song well. And I'm currently working on a video for that, and when it's available, it'll be right here. But if it's not, in the meantime, I would suggest watching this video instead. And see you in the next one.